It's an interesting thing about life that you can be a hero in your own life story and a villain in somebody else's life story, and neither are a lie. And for most of us, we try and avoid being a villain in somebody else's life as much as we possibly can, and sometimes that makes us a villain in itself, sitting on the fence, trying to please everybody, trying to avoid conflict. That's not a good recipe for anything. But there are a couple of things we need to understand about being a villain, and the first is it a predisposition? Because I was a crappy human being at some point in time, does that make me a bad person? And no, we are fallible, we're all human, and all of us have dark and light within us. That's the yin and the yang of the human condition. And only 1% of the population is dispositional villainy. In other words, they have a disposition to being a villain. 1% or less than 1% of the population. So maybe that's you. I hope not. But if you're on social media and you're watching this, 10 to 1, it isn't. But for the rest of us, we are situational villains. In other words, a situation evokes something in us that brings out this crappy human being side of us. Or maybe it wasn't. There are times when you become a villain in somebody else's story and actually it wasn't even your fault. It just somehow got there. And the interesting thing about life is that we tend to play the breakup game with most things. And let me explain that. So I could be on a cell phone chatting to you and you are chatting to me, and the line starts breaking up and I can't hear you. And the first thing we do, the very first thing, unless we know we're in a bad position, and that's a little bit different, but the first thing we do is say, hey, you're breaking up. Which is a bit weird, because I'm on a line here, you're on a line there, it's the same line, but now I'm telling you that you're breaking up. And that's what we do, is as soon as there is a situation, things aren't going our way, our instinct is to look for blame elsewhere. We don't say to the other person, hey, I'm breaking up, it's me, I'm breaking up, so let me phone you back, I'm breaking up. That's not what happens. So just think about that for a little bit. There are two people and there's a connection between them, and that's the issue for me, is that most conflicts where the one person lands up being the villain or the perpetrator and the other person lands up being the victim, it's the connection. It's not because I'm a bad person, you're a good person, or you're a bad person, I'm a good person. It's this connection. Something happened. We're incredibly complex human beings. We're made up of character traits, of predispositions for various things, of various truths that we've picked up from all sorts of external stimuli, our histories, our emotions, all of these things make us incredibly complex at any given time. And it's how that complexity relates to another person's complexity that normally provides this platform for the dynamic of victim-perpetrator. And this is all quite pertinent to me because very recently I wrote a letter to somebody who I haven't seen for literally 2 years. And the reason I wrote this letter is because this complexity got to a place that was quite ugly, and the crappy side of my human nature came out, as it did in him. And I took the brunt of that at that point in time, and for 2 years I've stepped away. But I've needed to address that, and so I wrote a letter which is extremely heartfelt, very genuine letter of apology and ownership for everything I did at that time to hurt this other person. And I did. I hurt him. And it was a real ownership of, I know that I'm nobody in your life. I haven't stopped caring for you. I've still taken an interest in you. I'm incredibly proud of the person that you become. And I genuinely am sorry for everything I did at that time. And if I could have it again, I would do it very, very differently. The intent was amazing. But what came back was extremely, excruciatingly painful for me. It was everything that I wouldn't have expected. And I was cast as it wasn't just little bad Rich, I was now big bad Rich. Now this had made me even more of a villain, which was odd to me, but the video isn't about that. It got me to understand that sometimes in your life, you're a crappy human being, something happened, whatever it was, and you found yourself in this role of being a villain. You react with guilt, because that's what happens. And guilt's a good thing. It's a useless emotion in many ways, but in some it's good. It's good in that what guilt does is hopefully gets you to do something to right the situation. You try and fix it, you try and sort it out, you try and address it, you try and do whatever you possibly can to make it different. And you might apologize at that time. And then the dynamic starts to play. Because this person's chosen the role of a victim and you're the perpetrator, even though you're apologizing, there's not a behavior change here. Because trust me, two sides of this line, I didn't get to that place on my own. You're never going to get to that place on their own. There are always two parties. And the breakup game happens. This person's saying, no, but it's your fault. And you're saying, no, but it's your fault. And this is how it works. Until eventually one person backs down and says, okay, well, I'm really, really sorry. I'm the asshole in your narrative. I'll be the villain in your story. And apologizes. But even then, because the dynamic hasn't changed, the line hasn't changed. We haven't put down the phones and picked them up again, different line. It's the same line. Something's inevitably going to happen that's going to spark it off again. It's going to be a trigger. It's going to be I think that's also why in divorce, in cases of divorce where they're kids and these two people don't ever have a complete break where they have proper time, because time is an amazing thing. Your brain has the capacity to forget displeasurable moments, and as a victim, you should ultimately get to that place where you forget all the negative things that happen and remember the good things that happen and remember the good things about that person. And for the perpetrator, you should get to a place where the brain forgets the guilt and forgets the negativity and things that you did and remembers the good and the pleasurable things that you brought this person. And you can move into that space where even if you're not together anymore, you move to that space where you've moved on from the villainy part and the ugliness of it. But in a case where there's a divorce and the kids involved, it's almost impossible to get to that place because you're having to interact, and there could be apologies, there could be whatever, but you go straight back to that place. And that breakup game is a horrible one because you use words like never. You've never ever put the toilet seat down. You've never ever done the dishes. Like you're 47, but you've never ever washed the dishes. That's what happens because it becomes this attack on the villain. So you can be the hero in your story, and your story has a happy ever after. So what it's taught me is that it's okay to be the villain. It's actually okay to be the villain. You're providing the happy ever after in somebody's fairy tale. It's inevitable. And what you need to remember, and this is what I've had to remember, is that because I'm the villain in this person's story, and then the people around him, it doesn't make me a villain. I'm a hero in my daughter's eyes. In fact, that's the most important thing in my life. It's the one thing that I strive for more than anything else, is to always be, no matter how old my girls get, how old I get, is to be the hero in my daughter's eyes. I'm a friend to many. I give a huge amount of myself to other people with positive, good energy. I raise money and give it to people who don't have it. There's a lot of good about me, but yet I'm a villain in somebody else's eyes. And that's okay. That's just got to be okay. It's inevitable. It's got to be okay. And lastly, what I want to say is that when you are emotionally mature enough and evolved enough as a human being to understand yourself and understand how you react towards other people and how situations bring out that villain in you, it's quite important to understand how to avoid those situations or people. Stay away, because you can't fix it. You can't make it right. You can't change that situation. And the more you keep on trying, the more of a villain you're going to be. The sooner you can move away, the sooner you can step away, understand what situations bring out the villain in you, and turn around and walk away. But embrace your inner villain. Dracula said it. He said sometimes what the world doesn't need is another hero. Sometimes what the world needs is a monster. You can be a hero and a villain in the same time. But what's really important is that those closest to you love you exactly who you are. That's what's important. Take care. If you liked the video, please hit like. Follow me for more. See you next time. Cheers.